We're going to go ahead and get started. We've got our panelists here. Good afternoon. My name is Lillian Butler-Hale. I'm the Outreach and Engagement Director for Open Sky Policy Institute. So excited to have our panelists here today to talk about SNAP with us. SNAP is a critical resource for thousands of families in the state of Nebraska. And with so much uncertainty at the federal level, it is more important than ever that we understand what this program is, how it is funded, and the impact that it has on the health and well-being of Nebraskans. Our panelists will address the current threats to SNAP funding, what is at stake, and the complex nature of navigating, funding, and utilizing the program. By the end of this webinar, participants will have a better understanding of who is eligible for SNAP in Nebraska, how SNAP is funded, and the implications of cuts to SNAP funding in Nebraska. Just a couple of housekeeping items really quick. We will be recording this webinar and it will be made available on our YouTube channel. You can also reach out to our Outreach and Engagement Manager, Noah Rhodes, and he would be happy to send it to you directly. If anyone has questions you would like to ask our panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat. The chat is private, so your questions will come directly to us, and then we will make sure to get them in the Q&A following our panelist presentations. As a final note, there will be a survey sent out to everyone in this webinar. If you could fill that out when you receive it, that helps us a lot so that we can make sure we're putting on events that are helpful to you all in the future. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists here. First, we have Katie Nungesser. Katie Nungesser is the policy coordinator at Voices for Children in Nebraska. With 15 years of nonprofit experience, Katie has focused her work on ensuring that people with lived experience are given a seat at the table. She has a deep understanding of how SNAP policy impacts Nebraskans beyond the walls of the Capitol. Thanks so much for being here, Katie. We also have Tim Williams. We have two Tims here today, so I am going to address them with their last names. Tim Williams is the Government Affairs and Advocacy Officer for the Foodbank for the Heartland. Over the last 10 years, Tim has coordinated volunteers and built coalitions within the communities that are most directly impacted by a variety of state policies in Nebraska and Missouri. Thanks so much for being here, Tim Williams. Now we're going to talk about Tim Klipp-Lockhart, who is also here. Tim Klipp-Lockhart is the Government Affairs Manager with the Food Resource and Action Center. Along with the rest of the Legislative Affairs team, Tim works with Congress, the White House, national organizations, FRAC's diverse state and local grassroots field network to help improve the access and participation to domestic anti-hunger programs for low-income individuals and families. Tim is also a Nebraska native, and we're glad to have him here today. And lastly, we have Jennifer James. Jennifer James is a community advocate working in both SNAP and disability rights for Nebraskans. Her direct experience offers her a breadth of knowledge on what these policies look like at the ground level and what they mean for Nebraskans who rely on them. We also might have Senator Victor Roundtree joining us today. He did have an event over the lunch hour, so we're hopeful that he'll have a chance to join. And if he does, we'll just introduce him when he hops on. But in the meantime, Katie, I wonder if you don't mind answering a couple basic questions about SNAP to kind of level set this conversation.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much. So, Katie, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what SNAP is, just right from the get-go.
Yeah, for sure. So SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps. It is a federal program that just helps low-income individuals and their families buy food. It is the largest anti-hunger program in the nation. And like I said, it's really designed just to fill those gaps. So it's not there to necessarily provide a full grocery budget for families, but it really just fills in the gaps. So they can especially afford the nutritious food or the different foods that are more inclusive for their families.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that background. I also wonder, and I think that you'd be a great person to answer this question. I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about the difference between how the SNAP program is intended to function and what's in statute, how that language kind of translates to what people experience in practice.
Yeah, I was excited to be here today as somebody that was on SNAP myself. And then I spent about 10 years helping people apply for SNAP and then helping them through that whole process to the end. So I learned a lot about what people are experiencing. And then here at Voices, I get to really try to translate that to figure out how we can use that to move good policy. And so part of our investment in this at Voices too is that almost 70% of the households that are on SNAP have children in them. And we know of those, at least 50% of those families are working. And so one of the things that we see this disconnect here is this continued push for more work requirements. Sometimes when we work with policymakers, we almost feel like we get in these conversations of caseworking. Like policymakers want to see the program funded and they want to see it supported, but they also have all these things like people should be doing this, this, and this when they're on SNAP, not realizing that people are really resourceful, and they can figure this out. So we want to see a move away from trying to add more work requirements. I think that's one of the things on the grounds that just doesn't match up. Some of the policy just doesn't make sense. And leave some people without access to food. So hopefully Senator Roundtree will be here to talk about some of the things that happen when you have a drug felony. Some of the other things that we see just not aligning has to do with the approval rating. I know that over the years it's gone up and down. The food banks have been a huge part of helping get that up. But at one point in Nebraska, I know it was down to like 42% of people applying were making it through the process. So people are eligible, people should be getting this, but something is happening along that way that is just stopping people from connecting all the way. And so like I said, the food banks will be talking later, but they have done amazing work to try to understand what are those barriers and those gaps, and how do we keep listening to people on the ground to create policies that'll break those down. And I saw Senator Roundtree popped in, so I wanted to stop there.
I was just gonna say that was such a beautiful segue, actually. I want to just take a second real quick. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. Senator Roundtree is in his first year serving in the legislature, and he prioritized SNAP legislation. And we were also excited to see that. Senator, I wonder if you'd just like to take a couple minutes to introduce yourself, talk about your bill. We know you have something to hop to next, so go ahead whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, everybody, for the great welcome. Yes, I have a little technical difficulties. I had about 4 of these on my calendar, so we finally got the right one where I can join in on that. But yes, I'm Vic Roundtree. I represent District 3 down in Bellevue and Papillion, and that, yes, a freshman senator. But I have a great heart for the least of these, and in my district we experience, especially where my church is located, and we work a lot with our lower income SNAP families and the food insecure. We do a lot of contributions to our local food bank and just taking care of our own distribution from the church. And as we deal with the families, this opportunity for this piece of legislation was twofold. Number one, I'm trying to combat the food insecurity the SNAP benefits offer, restoring also dignity to families. A lot of times people may not want to be on assistance, but it's a segue for them to get to their independence. And so we talk about the dignity of families. And this particular bill, when I was approached to carry this one by Nebraska Appleseed on, for the felons, this is back from 1996. And it's time that if we're going to be a Christian nation, we stand on the word of God as I preach that word that we're based upon forgiveness and restoration. And this is one of those things that there's a great gap, and we needed to carry that for restoration. If someone has served their penance or sentence, then let's restore them. And especially when this was done back in 1996, states had the option to include these felons, and Nebraska hasn't done that. So I know the legislation has been brought before, but I feel that this is a great time and an opportunity that we can finally get that last barrier knocked down. And it was a good bill to prioritize it. When I came in, they asked, what are you going to stand for? What mountain will you die on? What are you going to fight to defend? Well, I think this particular bill has become that one that I'm going to fight to defend. And make sure that I know it's about 1,000 families that are impacted by that, but a little bit of 11's the law. So if we can get these done, it's going to take care of our families. As I'm a substitute teacher in the school systems, I see kids that come to school and they're hungry, and I know if they're hungry, they're not going to be able to learn. So I want to work hard to make sure that we can cover every aspect to restore families, their cohesiveness, and strong families build our strong communities. Our strong communities build our cities, and our strong cities build our state. And we can have Nebraska, the good life. So I want to thank all of the organizations that are supporting this piece of legislature. I will be reaching out, and we will be in here together trying to get this one across the finish line this time. I think this is our time and our season. So I'm standing on that. And with that, I'm open to any questions that you may have while we have this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. That was super well said. You could probably convince me of anything, but that was super well said. Thank you. Senator, I wonder while we just have you for 1 or 2 more minutes here, can you just share one thing with our panelists and our attendees, like that really surprised you while you were kind of researching this SNAP legislation? I know you talked about some of the statistics. Is there anything that sticks out in your head that you think this was the thing that just completely shocked me?
Be honest, this piece of legislation itself did, because I never thought that when you look at all the things that one can be restored for and how they can get back in the game with the SNAP, this one piece is carved out that no matter what you do, this could have been something that happened, when I was a 20-year-old, but now I'm 65 and still I'm locked out of the system. And it just goes counterclockwise to what we believe in. And so when I received that and I had a chance to kind of dig into it a little bit more, and it's amazing that, those that stand against it, that was really surprising to me. Everyone wants an opportunity to be forgiven because none of us are perfect. And that was one opportunity here that we're going to stand staunch on and never let someone recover for. So that was and I know we're going to talk about the numbers and the dollars in just a little while on that, but for the amount of money that we're talking about, physical dollars, compared against the restoration of dignity for families and how much more food we can put on the table, just for that one member now being able to get their SNAP benefit, it's really surprising. So that's why I want to fight hard to get this one across. It makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for your work on it. We do not envy you in your position, but we're very thankful for the work that you're doing. So thank you so much. We know you're a busy person, so stay on. We'd love to have you, but no worries if you have to hop off.
I want to say, as an Air Force member, 30 years of service, going out to war for our country after 9/11, faithful service. I'm in it for the fight. I was built for this moment. So there's no backing up and no quitting here. Okay.
We love to hear that. Thank you so much, Senator. You have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. I do have to go down to Bellevue for another event, but thanks for having me on.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you now.
All right. So wonderful to have Senator Roundtree here for just a couple minutes. Katie, when you were closing on your comments previously, you were mentioning the food banks, and we are so lucky to have Tim Williams here from Foodbank for the Heartland to discuss kind of their role in working with the SNAP program. Tim, what is Foodbank for the Heartland's mission, and how does it overlap with SNAP?
Sure. Thanks, Lillian. So our mission at the Food Bank is to eliminate hunger across the Heartland through consistent access to healthy foods through community partnership. And so I can think of no really better way, right, to ensure that our neighbors have the consistent access to the food that they choose than making sure that we are connecting folks to SNAP. And so we do, not only do we work at a sort of advocacy and policy level to make sure that we are advocating on behalf of our network partners across the whole state and our neighbors to ensure that proactive SNAP policies are passed in the legislature at a state level and a federal level, and beat back some bad policies. But we work at the community level to implement what's called the state outreach plan in collaboration with the state of Nebraska. And so we partner with groups across the state to connect folks to application assistance, to education materials, sort of a SNAP 101, if you will, to make sure that people understand what the eligibility requirements are, how to submit paperwork if they need to do that, make sure that they're prepared for their interview. And so sort of from step A to step Z to make sure that they are connected to their benefits. We in the state of Nebraska also operate a sort of 1-800 number, so where people can get phone assistance to basically sign up for SNAP over the phone. And so it's that sort of it's a mock in person, but it's you're getting someone that lives in the community that knows Nebraska, knows our partners, knows the food bank, and can help you through that whole process. And so SNAP is the most efficient way that we can talk about when we're looking at erasing or reducing food insecurity. And so that's why it's a very integral part of how we connect folks to our mission.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective, just with you being in the community and be connected to all this network of organizations that are working on food insecurity. I wonder if you could share a little bit, whatever your background is, in what food insecurity looks like in Nebraska, or however in the counties that you work in.
Yeah, so we've seen across the whole state, food insecurity has grown uh, tremendously. And I would say disproportionately, you see that those effects in our more rural counties compared to our more urban counties. If you want to take a year-to-year sort of comparison, in the past year, we've seen food insecurity jump to approximately 268,000 Nebraskans, where the year before it was around 196,000. And we're also looking currently where that food insecurity rate affects 1 in 5 children across the state. So these are numbers that are only getting higher, and would see or argue that we are experiencing historic highs when it comes to food insecurity across the state of Nebraska. And that also is translated into the folks that are, and the numbers of individuals that we're seeing at the pantry level as well. That number, if you look at a graph, it's going up like this over a timeline that stretches back to 2018. We're seeing more people at our pantries than we were at the height of the pandemic. We're not seeing those resources that are matching that sort of increased need as well. So that is only translating into higher rates of food insecurity.
Yeah, I think that that might surprise folks that these numbers were rising before 2020, because I think a lot of folks are thinking, okay, there was some federal funding that came down, supported your work at Foodbank for the Heartland, and maybe you don't need those funds anymore because numbers have, returned to what they were in maybe 2014 or 2015, but it sounds like that's not the case.
Yeah,
Am I understanding you right?
you're totally correct, right? And sort of a analogous situation that we sometimes like to reference to is the recession in 2008. And so during that time, it took roughly a 10-year period for numbers to go back to pre-recession or pre-2008 numbers. And so since in the past, handful of years, Nebraska has faced several sort of crises that have only exacerbated food insecurity. So starting in 2009 or 19, when we had terrible flooding that caused undue burdens on our neighbors, then we had a pandemic, and then ongoing inflation and rising grocery prices. And so we could always say that that sort of 10-year period really hasn't started in the state of Nebraska, because we haven't had I don't like to use the word normal, but we really haven't had a normal time period in over 6 years where Nebraska hasn't really been burdened with something outside of the norm. And so with ongoing inflation, with ongoing grocery prices, with only being a handful of years outside of a pandemic, right? It's the need is not just going down, and it's not like a light switch, right? Where one day someone's food insecure and the next day they're not. It's an ongoing and sometimes systematic issue that takes years and years and years to overcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for that perspective. So Katie gave us this background on what SNAP is and who is eligible for SNAP, and Tim kind of gave us the state lens. Tim Klipp-Lockhart is here from FRAC. And Tim, I wonder if you might be able to speak to what is slated to change with regard to SNAP benefits on the federal level.
Sure, and thank you for having me. I'm going to try and break it down as much as I can, because right now we're in the midst of reconciliation, which is a bit confusing. And it's a special legislative process that allows Congress to pass budget-related bills with a simple majority in the Senate, bypassing the filibuster, which is usually takes a 60-vote threshold to pass budget-related bills. And it's the reconciliation is typically used to advance spending, revenue, and debt-related policies. So Congress is currently in the midst of reconciliation discussions with key negotiations focused on, budgetary and policy priorities. The timeline remains fluid as they aim to advance reconciliation measures in the coming months. likely before the end of the fiscal year, most likely, and before August recess. As part of this process, the House Agriculture Committee has been instructed to cut programs under its jurisdiction by $230 billion, which could have significant implications for nutrition assistance and farm programs. As for SNAP, proposed changes could include potential funding adjustments, work requirements, or benefit modifications, depending on legislative negotiations. Potential cuts include reductions to the Thrifty Food Plan, which is the basis for calculating SNAP benefits, which affects benefit levels. A second one is shifting more program costs to the states and imposing stricter work requirements on recipients of SNAP.
Okay. That is super helpful information. And I know that a lot of us in this policy space and, citizens of Nebraska have been confused by some of the information that's coming down from the federal level. I work in this area and I have been confused with some of the news and the information that's coming down. So I appreciate you kind of putting that into more understandable terms for us. So you talked about some reductions and cuts. Can you talk a little bit about the benefit level and what changes to that would look like, and how might those changes affect SNAP in Nebraska?
Sure. So right now, these are all things that we can only allude to what may happen, as they have not put out specific policies to cut SNAP yet. However, the instructions to the House Agriculture Committee say $230 billion, which is right around the exact amount of money it took for the Thrifty Food Plan adjustment that happened in 2021. So if they were to cut the Thrifty Food Plan by $230 billion, it would essentially be a reduction in benefits from an average of $6.20 a day to an average of $4.80 a day, specifically taking food off the table from SNAP recipients. And the United States of America, not just the state of Nebraska, the United States of America, there are over 41 million Americans on SNAP currently. The other one that seems to be potentially more likely is shifting the cost to states. We don't know exactly how they're going to do this, and whether or not it'll be a change in the law of the entitlement structure. However, that could be, and just for some background, right now, currently states are mandated to pay 50% of administrative costs for the SNAP benefit, for the SNAP program. However, SNAP benefits are 100% federally funded. So we, right now, the talking points that come out of the House Agriculture Committee majority say that there will be no cuts to benefit levels. However, if they do shift costs to states, the state budget folks that are here on the call know better than me that you have to balance a budget. And if you cannot make up a 5%, a 10% cost shift to the state, that could potentially mean taking money away from other programs that the state budget supports, or it could be a reduction in benefits, or they reduce different types of ways to become more eligible for programs throughout the state. In addition to cuts to maybe benefit levels, it could also impact school meals with the community eligibility provision, and a few other programs related to if they were to cut Thrifty, it could impact the emergency food assistance program that Tim uses at his food bank. And there are just some other, things that could happen down the line that would impact folks in Nebraska.
Yeah, thank you so much for that information. So Tim, I wonder if, you talked a little bit about work requirements. I'm not sure if you feel comfortable sharing a little bit more about what that would look like in practice. We do have a bill that was proposed by a Nebraska legislator to reinstate work requirements. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the reason behind that push.
Well, at the state level, I'm not quite certain what his reason was behind that bill. But work requirements essentially, from a standpoint from where we're at, is to reduce the number of people that are on SNAP. that way that they can reduce the overall price tag that the federal government pays out. So I don't know if Katie or Tim or somebody else would rather address the state level policy, since I work at the federal level.
For sure. Thank you so much, Tim. Katie, do you want to hop in there and just speak a little bit about work requirements? I think Tim gave us a really good point there, which is that essentially it's to reduce these costs. And we're keenly aware that we're in a budget shortfall here, but at the same time, you know, there are some ideas that are maybe more sustainable than others. Can you talk about that bill a little bit?
Yeah, Senator Anderson brought a bill to mandate like employment and training on anyone, I want to say with a child 6 years of age and older. So if you have kids under the age of 6, or there's a couple other exclusions, it would move it into a mandatory participation, which ideally those programs are going to work to get people employed, if they're already employed, to find them like a livable wage, not just like a minimum wage. But the reality of it is those programs are very expensive. We don't have the capacity in Nebraska to roll them out. The data that we have shows that work requirements aren't actually effective. Like doing this isn't a great way to get people. We have such a low unemployment rate in Nebraska anyways. And Nebraska Appleseed actually has some really interesting information that breaks down, like on Medicaid. We don't have it exactly on SNAP, but we know it's very similar. Is like most people that are receiving these benefits that can work are working. Then there's this other group that's exempt because of disabilities, age, things like that. But then there's this other group that has these other reasons that are valid. And so by pushing work requirements even harder, when we know that pretty much everyone that can work is working on it, we're just going to be removing food from households that desperately need it. So again, we just don't have any proof that these work requirements work. It's a very expensive thing to undertake across Nebraska. We don't really have the capacity to roll out that employment and training. And again, we just have a concern of Voices for Children. Like when you're looking at parents that have kids over the age of 6, there's a lot of other reasons why being out in the workforce might not be a fit for that family in that moment. And we're relying on caseworkers to kind of evaluate that. And we just haven't seen it work well. Like with currently in Nebraska, if you are an able-bodied adult that does not have dependents, and someone that is able to work, you have to work to receive SNAP, or volunteer at least 20 hours a week. So you cannot, as a person that's physically and mentally able to work, you can't sit at home and collect SNAP. So pushing these things like work requirements to me feels like a smoke and mirrors. Like we know that there aren't people just sitting at home collecting this. There's reasons why they're not able to have that earned income. And so we just want to continue to highlight that we think the things that are in place are already working in terms of able-bodied adults not being able to be on SNAP unless they're participating in other programs. And let's not move anyone else off of SNAP that might have reasons that aren't being caught in this filter.
And I
Sorry,
think
go ahead.
one thing that you've said, I think time limits and work requirements go hand in hand. Oftentimes, you know, one of the proposals that we've heard is moving time limits for able-bodied adults without dependents from age 52, which increases in this year to 54, moving that up to age 61 or 62. So that is just another way that they're looking at, you know, not allowing people to have time to find a job and to then be kicked off of SNAP benefits. So we can have this discussion in a little bit. So
yeah, and part of
thank you so
Anderson's
much.
bill too. Sorry, that made me think.
No,
It would
go,
also
Katie.
remove the state's ability to use waivers. So the state only uses about 300 of these a year, but they use discretionary waivers to kind of exempt people from some of those requirements in areas like specifically like Thurston County, where there's not a lot of economic mobility, there's not jobs available. And so rolling out some of these policies, again, it just doesn't make sense with what's happening on the ground. Especially like that's an area that has one of our Native American reservations, and they are totally, you know, building and growing all the time. There's still just not enough employment for everyone that's living there. And so something like this would unfairly impact certain groups of people. And again, DHS only uses about 300 of these discretionary exemptions, but we really trust their judgment in that. And we trust that if they're exempting someone from that in order for them to get food, there's probably a really good reason. And let's let the experts be the experts instead of our legislature taking that decision-making power away from the department.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Katie and Tim, for the background on that. I so appreciate that you have both the federal and the state perspectives that you can share with us. I wanted to just pop over and chat with Jennifer a little bit, who is on with us and again is a community advocate for SNAP. Jennifer, can you talk to us a little bit about how you got involved with advocating around SNAP?
When I was a little girl for a little while, my family was on SNAP. My mom was a single mother working 3 jobs and still couldn't get, still had to use it to get food on the table for me and my brother. There was a time that we weren't on SNAP and that was good, but there was also time we were. So I know how much it is needed for people in the state, especially like me and my mom who are disabled and can't work anymore. I mean, it makes it able for me to eat. If I didn't have SNAP, I probably wouldn't be able to eat. And it's very hard for me to be able to pay for food and for everything else with just the money I get from SSI. So SNAP really helps me be able to live in my own home and be able to pay for everything else, plus have food on the table for me. I know a lot of people don't get a lot of SNAP benefits, but it's good for the people who do have it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. What are some of the things about SNAP that you maybe wish folks knew when they were crafting policy around it, or even when they're advocating?
I think, and I think a lot of people think that some people are just lazy and they just sit around home and collect SNAP benefits because they don't want to work. Like I've been hearing, it's, some of us work and don't make enough money to support ourselves and put food on the table for our families. And some of us are disabled and can't work. We want to work. Like I want to get a job. I do, but I can't because of my disability. But I think that people think that we are just cheating the system because we don't want to work. And I don't think they look at that because they don't see it in their own families. So they don't look at it and they don't think about the other people who need it. They do because they don't see it every day in their lives.
Sure. I think this is a great opportunity for us to open it up to the full panel to kind of discuss a little bit of this. And maybe Jennifer, you can kick us off on this full panel discussion. To all of you, what are some of the major barriers that keep people who are eligible for SNAP from applying for it? And how can policymakers maybe address those barriers? Jennifer, do you have any experience around applying and those sorts of things that maybe you could talk about?
It's very hard to apply. They do have a lot of questions and a lot of paperwork to apply for SNAP. And a lot of people I think don't ask for it because they don't want to seem to have a handout or ask for assistance. They want to be on their own individual and be independent and take care of themselves without asking for handouts. So I think people don't go for that assistance because they don't want to seem weak. And I've seen people in stores with SNAP card where they're trying to hide it because they're so embarrassed about having it. They know people can be very mean about it if they see you have a SNAP card. So I think that's just one of the barriers. They don't want to be seen with it.
Okay. Katie, I saw you nodding. Do you have anything to add to that, or did Jennifer hit all the points?
I was just really like, I feel like I've heard this type of thing she's saying over and over when we're out in communities. We even had a grocery store in rural Nebraska that the workers were taking pictures of purchases, putting it on Facebook, saying, look what this person's buying with their SNAP. And I just appreciate the continued education. I think with the sunset bills of the increased gross eligibility, the SNAP coalition, including the food banks and Appleseed and a bunch of groups, have done a great job of engaging with grocery store owners. And how does that education and conversation from both sides start to change the experience that end user has when that grocery store owner starts to realize like how much that rural store is really dependent on some of these programs to keep their doors open, and how important it is for their community members to have access? Can that help change the culture for that end user, that the unfortunate embarrassment or things that can happen? I'm really glad that it's on a debit card like system right now, but the debit card is still definitely, like Jennifer saying, like you can tell that someone's using it because it's a different color. But I think moving towards just being more nondescript, just like some of the other programs through the state, they use like US Bank debit cards. It's like, how can we move to something like that where there shouldn't be shame in this, but like really take into account what it feels like to use it at the end, and continue those conversations with the vendors to say like what can be done on the vendor end to make this a better experience. Because we know our participation rates in low are still lower than the national average in Nebraska. So only 8% of Nebraskans have been using this program. Nationally, it's 12%. And that's part of what those outreach groups like food banks and other groups do also, is try to really reach out to those groups that are under participating and get them to understand why SNAP is important for you, for your community, for our economy, keep those local grocery stores and corner stores open. So all of it kind of comes together, but I think that stigma gets overlooked when we're talking policy, and I think there's room to push on it there too.
Absolutely. I think you're totally right. I think that there are some pieces of this where, Jennifer talking about her lived experience and you talking about what you've seen in rural Nebraska, where the numbers and data cannot always speak to the sorts of factors that are impacting policy at the state level or at the federal level. So I think that's really important to know. Um, Tim Williams, did you have anything to share about that, on just how the food bank might see some of those impacts that wouldn't show up in legislative language, for instance?
Well, yeah, I think Jennifer and Katie are spot on, right? I think it's the major barrier, right? And we see it, and I think when we deal with policymakers or people or decision makers too, is that a lot of folks have a one-track mind of who a SNAP user is or who anyone is that is on a public benefit program. And so when we are engaging, whether it's at a policy or a community level, it's working to provide concrete education and information on what SNAP is, how people use it, how they get connected to the program, fill in the blank, so that we are working on a sort of myth busting sort of structure in order to properly educate on SNAP. And so the more information we could talk about who we are talking to, whether in the phone or when we are in person doing outreach at one of our sort of local health centers too, it sort of helps break down that stigma of what people have preconceived notions around anyone that is on benefits. So that's all I'll add.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I wonder too, this might be a good segue for you to talk a little bit. And Jennifer and Katie talked a little bit about misconceptions about the SNAP program or folks that receive benefits, and you shared that too, Tim. Are there any misconceptions about the food bank or the work that you do there that you feel like is important to share in this discussion on food insecurity and those sorts of things?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think one thing is that the thing I will add to that is that we at the food bank work a lot with our partners across the state. When I mean partners, I'm saying our pantries, our churches, our schools, and all that sort of stuff. And so when we here at Foodbank for the Heartland, we really just serve as, we are a big warehouse and distribution center, and everything that comes here doesn't stay here and goes out into the broader Nebraska. And so any cuts or gains or anything like that, it doesn't stay here. It disproportionately will affect our partners and neighbors and those that are doing the groundwork. We as the food bank like to call ourselves, or we act as a sort of convener or a sort of go-between sort of thing. And so when we're talking about cuts, we're talking about access or lack of access to nutrition programs, it's seen and that burden is placed on our pantry system or the pantry system across the state of Nebraska.
Thank you so much. That's really enlightening. I am going to pop over to Tim Klipp-Lockhart now. Tim, you of course can hop in on any of these questions that we've already asked if you have anything that's coming to mind, but I wonder if, just with your experience with the federal level in ways that of course us at the state level maybe don't know about, what are effective ways for people to become more knowledgeable about SNAP or engage with their representatives or those sorts of things? Can you share anything about your experience on the federal level that might speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I want to say one last thing about the misconceptions about
Yeah, please.
food banks, and it's that the food charity sector, like food banks and food pantries and churches, like Tim was talking about, can make up the difference when the federal government cuts SNAP. SNAP provides 9 meals that a food bank can provide 1. They cannot make up the difference for cutting SNAP benefits at the federal level, which in turn will impact local economies, farmers, the small grocers in all of the small rural towns across the state of Nebraska, where a SNAP recipient may have to drive 60 miles to get to the grocery store that's an authorized retailer. So the food banks don't have that. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the money. They don't have the food to make that up. And so that is why SNAP is such an important lifeline to so many people across the country, including Nebraska. Other ways to get involved would, really is to find your local folks on the ground. I'm sure Voices for Children has different opportunities for you to engage with your local leaders. There are different action networks from Nebraska Appleseed, from my organization, the Food Research and Action Center, or better known as FRAC, where we have different priorities or protections where you can, it's a one-click thing where you can send a message to your representative based on your zip code. The other options are to use the Capitol switchboard and find the number of your representative. At this point in time, I feel like it's very important you learning about SNAP and the potential cuts to go talk to your local folks, your mayors, your county officials, your human service administrators, your state legislators. Those are the people that should be worried about where they're going to find the money when the federal government does an unfunded mandate essentially to the states to provide benefits to their constituents. And where are they going to find the money in order to balance their budget? If the state gets, if this gets put on the state, they will pass that down to different parts of the state to help fund benefits or work requirements. And just remember that they are also trying to cut Medicaid as well. And so this would be a double shift to the states just from those 2 programs alone, not even talking about the decreased revenue that the state will have at those local grocers, at the big grocers even, and it'll be a downturn essentially for the local economy in the state of Nebraska. Yeah.
Thank you so much. You made a lot of great points there, and one of your points I think is going to speak to one of our Q&A questions that we'll come back to in just a second. I think I have one more kind of broader panel question for you and I think it would be great to have different perspectives on this. So Katie, maybe you can start here and then we can get different folks' opinions. So let's say Senator Roundtree's bill passes this year, or Senator Quick's 192, or the work requirements bill that we talked about a little bit earlier. How long does it take for those policy changes to really create either benefits or issues in practice for Nebraskans, let's say? Like, does it take a while to even see, oh, these people are really benefiting from these things, or does it show any change at all? Do you have any background on that you can share?
I think so. LB 192 is the bill to keep those higher income limits in place. So the nice thing about that is that one, immediately it will just keep people on. I think there's still a lot of outreach needed. I don't think people realize when there is a change like that, so many people had been denied between that 130% of the federal poverty line and 165 in the past, that they still might not have tried again. So there's still a lot of talking to do to get people to know that it's even increased. And hopefully, like we said, hopefully that increase will stay with LB 192. Senator Roundtree's, I think, again, it goes back to how strong is our outreach and education, because so many people have been denied for so many years. The data on that, I know Senator Roundtree said about 1,000 Nebraskans would be impacted. We believe it's a lot higher because a lot of the agencies, like Tim talked about the outreach plan across the state, they're very well trained in this. And so sometimes when they're explaining some of that, people might just not even put in their application, because why would they start that process? So I think there's way more people impacted. again, we've got to hit the ground running and let people know like, hey, this changed. So I would say in the data, probably a couple years, but I mean, in reality, like it makes things better really quickly if someone knows that they're re-eligible or eligible again. And so there's a lot of myth busting to do. So that was, I don't know if I answered that correctly, but I think that one of the issues with the sunset bill was we almost didn't have long enough of trying out that higher income bracket to really get good data, because it's taking so much work to try to let people know. The group that's impacted from that is working Nebraskans. So it's those Nebraskans that have that earned income. They're just not making enough, or they're underemployed, or they have a big household size, whatever it may be. That's kind of a tough group to get to, right? Because they might not be engaging in some of these other services. And so we just have to keep talking and let people know, even if you're employed, please check in and see where you land underneath these new policy changes.
That's very good advice. And yes, you answered that question perfectly. So thank you so much. Jennifer, would you happen to have any insights that you want to share just kind of to that question about, when these policies are enacted, do folks that, appreciate these benefits, use these benefits, do they see improvements in their lives immediately? Is it something that kind of takes time?
It does take time after you put in your application because they have to look through it all. And there's a lot of verifications they ask for. And I know half the time I send them in, I send them 3 times because they keep saying, oh, you didn't send them in, or oh, we lost them. So it takes a long time to get all the verifications they need for everything. I know it took my mom forever to do that when she had to do it when we were little kids. So, I mean, it does take a while for the process, but it does help immediately. It does help you get food. And I've seen people that go and buy, candy and soda with it, and then they get criticized for that. So again, it's the embarrassment of going in and buying what you want to buy for your family or your kids or whatever, and then knowing, okay, so I may get criticized for buying snacks for my kids or yourself or whatever. And I think that it does help immediately for the people who need it. But I know, like, if I have a lot of food stamps that I know I'm not going to be using that month, I will use that to pay it forward. I will go out and get food and go to the food bank and drop it off. Or I'll go to the little pantries around town and drop them off in those little pantries. Or I'll go to my church and drop stuff off there to donate for their food bank. I will go out, I will help pay it forward when I can with the money, with my food stamps that I get for me, because I know I won't be able to use them all, but that can help someone else. So it helps me, but also helps me feel good that if I can't use them all, or I don't want to just have it sit there on my card, I can use it to help other people as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that what we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes or so has just really centered around how beneficial this program is, and the myth busting and the work that needs to happen, not just on the ground, but in the rotunda here in Nebraska and at the federal level, to ensure that these benefits can continue to be used. And so, so that, we can keep helping folks to live healthy, prosperous lives. And, that is very important. So thank you so much for that background, Jennifer. We just have a couple Q&A questions, and then I'll give you folks a couple minutes back in your day, hopefully. I did want to shout out Tim Williams here because we did have an attendee that said Foodbank of the Heartland is amazing, and we greatly appreciate them in our North Platte community. And so I wanted to make sure that you got that kudos, because your work is very, very important, and we're so glad to have you on our webinar today. Some of these questions, Tim, Klipp-Lockhart, are a little bit more related to federal stuff. You did use the words unfunded mandate, and one of our attendees is asking, it seems that the work requirement would essentially create an unfunded mandate at the state level to monitor, create workforce development efforts, et cetera. And if the state cannot activate on that, ? And Katie, you mentioned this a little bit too. Do either of you want to talk to kind of what really in a little bit more detail what it would take for us to implement such a thing?
Well, Katie, you might know more about how it implements in the state specifically. So I think I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, a little biased here. We're definitely opposed to this idea. So we're still trying to find the common sense of it. Like, we have a unemployment office. We have a Department of Labor that already has systems in place that when someone is searching for employment, they can get that support through there. So we're just really confused on like, what is the difference to this? Like the numbers that have come out of the current employment and training, just really, really small numbers for the amount of money that you're dumping in to try to move people forward. And like, were these employment and training and these different tools that they want to force people into for work requirement reasons, were they even built by people that understand things from that ground level? Like, is this really helpful? Have we gotten feedback from people that have used these that are like, oh my gosh, this program really took my family from here to here? Are we actually seeing families move off of all state benefits, or are they just churning to where, like, my experience with other programs that have work requirements is that sometimes they'll push families to comply and they'll get a job, and it's such a low paying job that it's only months until, you know, a tire blows, somebody misses work and has unpaid sick leave, whatever, and that family cycles right back onto all of these systems. And so I guess our concern continues to be like, we don't understand how it's going to roll out in an efficient way. It seems extremely costly. It doesn't seem like they're meeting people where they're at. And have we taken a hard look at, like, we have such a low unemployment rate in Nebraska. What are these other barriers? Like, if we don't address our childcare and housing issues, then this employment and training and work requirements doesn't matter. So these small towns and things that are struggling to fill people for certain jobs, there is not affordable housing in that town and there's no daycare openings. So what are we doing, like trying to build more robust work requirements that are going to strip people of their food access, when even if someone has every intention to go fill that job spot, they don't have the other things in place. So
Yeah,
sorry, a little biased answer there, but
you're right though. Like, why would we do that? And I don't know the Nebraska specific data, but about 87% of households with like working able people that are able to work in America that are on SNAP, and like 60% of them are working while receiving benefits. So the problem is that many of those people, just like Katie said, are in low wage jobs with unstable hours, making it difficult to consistently meet the rigid work requirements. So it's not a good policy, and it doesn't affect the systemic issue at hand anyways, that people are not making enough money. And then there's like a benefit cliff at some point where you could make enough money to get off of SNAP, but you don't make enough money to be food secure. And so then you end up, either losing your job because it's a poor working condition, or the unstable hours are not beneficial for childcare, different things like that. And so you end up back on. So it's a cycle of poverty, essentially. And then, of course, then we can always talk about time limits as well. But those folks also, they only have like 3 months in a 3-year period to have a job. And so how many people do you know can find a job in 3 months? Interview process occasionally takes longer than 3 months anyways. So it's just a lot of burdensome things for the state also to do, which they already don't have the money to pay for extra merit staff employees. So it's just a poor policy that doesn't actually help people come out of poverty in the long run.
Thank you so much. I especially appreciate, Katie, Tim, Jennifer, all of us talking about the need for a holistic approach to ensure that, if we are passing these policies, it really makes sense to pass some of these policies. So thank you so much for the background on that. Tim, I can't let you off the hook on this federal question, because I certainly can't answer it. I wonder if you can talk about the USDA's recent action regarding the Emergency Assistance Program and the Local Food Purchase Assistance Cooperative Agreement and how that affects SNAP. And if you can't, it's so fine. We will follow up with our attendees and we'll let them know. But do you have any background on that at all?
I'm going to pass that to Tim Williams, because that is essentially going to potentially affect his work.
So, so that's referring to the LFPA program, right? That funding is set to terminate at the end of the current contract period, which for Nebraska will terminate this summer. So we are able at the Foodbank level, so both Foodbank for the Heartland and Foodbank of Lincoln are able to draw down those funds through the end of that contract period. So we work in the state of Nebraska. The Nebraska Children and Families Foundation holds that contract. So we work with them to then work with local growers, right, to make sure that we are then distributing that food to our partners and neighbors. It's after that contract ends, the additional funding that was announced in October of last year, that contract has been essentially rescinded, or that funding has been rescinded as of the other day, whenever that happened. We are hopeful, right, there that the USDA will move forward, just like the previous administration, using what's called Commodity Credit Corporation or CCC funds to hopefully put a like program in place, or something like the Biden administration did with LFPA. That is to be determined. And so we are monitoring that closely and working with our partners at Feeding America to make sure that, because this program has been rescinded, that we are not leaving neighbors and our partners without local produce, and that we are not that we are more able to robustly, support our local ag as well. Because when we're not able, this is a great program that has allowed us to really work diligently with our local growers and producers as well. So that's about as
Thank you so
clear
much.
as mud. But
no, that was very helpful.
yeah.
That was very helpful, but it's a really confusing time for everyone. So I appreciate you speaking to that. Those were the Q&A questions that came in for us, and I'd love to give you 5 more minutes back in your day. Thank you to all of our panelists and our attendees for joining us on your lunch hour. If there are any follow-up questions, we'd love to take them. Feel free to reach out to any of us at Open Sky, or to any of our lovely panelists that might have more information. And we'd love for you folks to fill out the survey for us to ensure that we can keep doing events like this. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here.